The history of Venice is one of the strangest and most remarkable stories in Europe, because this was a city that should hardly have existed at all. It was not founded on rich farmland, a defensive hill, or the crossing of a major road. It rose out of mud, salt water, marsh, and scattered islands in a shallow lagoon at the edge of the Adriatic. And yet from that unlikely setting came one of the wealthiest, most powerful, and most admired states in the medieval and Renaissance world. To understand Venice, we have to begin with collapse. In the final centuries of the Roman world and the violent years that followed, waves of invasion and political instability shook northern Italy. As older cities and settlements became more vulnerable, people increasingly looked to the lagoon for refuge. It was wet, unhealthy, awkward, and difficult to govern, but that was exactly what made it useful. Armies could march across plains and besiege walled towns, yet the maze of channels, mudflats, and islands offered a kind of protection that outsiders found frustrating. What began as a place of shelter slowly became something far more ambitious. Over time, the communities of the lagoon became more organized and more self-confident. They traded, fished, built churches, raised timber structures on driven piles, and learned how to live with the water instead of fighting it. Venice did not emerge as a typical kingdom built by one conquering dynasty. It developed as a maritime society, shaped by merchants, sailors, officials, and a ruling elite that understood something crucial. Survival in the lagoon depended on cooperation, discipline, and control of trade. That practical mindset would define Venetian politics for centuries. Its position was perfect for exchange. Venice faced west toward the cities of Italy and the markets of Europe, but it also looked east toward Byzantium, the eastern Mediterranean, and the riches of the Levant. Spices, silks, metals, timber, grain, glass, and luxury goods all moved through its hands. This made the city wealthy, but it also made it culturally distinctive. Venice was Latin and Catholic, yet it absorbed influences from the Greek world, the Islamic world, and beyond. Its art, architecture, and commerce all reflected that mixture. As Venice grew, so did its political identity. The office of the Doge emerged as the symbolic head of the state, but Venice was never simply a monarchy in the usual sense. Power became distributed through councils, committees, and carefully balanced institutions designed to stop any one family from dominating the republic completely. That was one of Venice's great strengths. While many other states were torn apart by succession crises and noble feuds, Venice cultivated an image of order, continuity, and collective rule. By the High Middle Ages, the city was no longer just a lagoon refuge. It was a republic with fleets, laws, diplomacy, and a growing overseas presence. Its merchants crossed seas, its shipyards expanded, and its leaders understood that trade and naval power were inseparable. Venice was becoming something rare, a city-state that behaved like an empire. The waters that had once protected it were now carrying it outward into history. The turning point in Venetian history came when commercial ambition turned into outright geopolitical power. Venice had already become rich through trade, but wealth alone was not enough. To secure its routes, protect its merchants, and outmaneuver rivals, the Republic needed influence over ports, islands, and strategic corridors across the Mediterranean. That is where Venice changed from an unusual city into a major power. Its rise was tied closely to Byzantium and the Eastern trade networks. Venetian merchants won privileges abroad, established quarters in foreign cities, and built relationships that gave them enormous advantage. But Venice was never passive. It knew how to exploit opportunity with ruthless precision. The clearest example came during the Fourth Crusade in the early 13th century. What began as a crusading expedition ended in one of the most shocking episodes of medieval history, the diversion of the Crusade and the sack of Constantinople in 1204. Venice did not merely profit from the chaos, it helped shape it, and from the wreckage it gained territory, influence, and prestige on a huge scale. That moment revealed the true nature of Venetian power. The Republic could present itself as pious, lawful, and civilized, but underneath was a hard strategic intelligence. Venice was pragmatic to the core. It preferred calculation to glory, contracts to impulse, and advantage to sentiment. The great arsenal, its vast shipbuilding complex, became one of the wonders of the age, able to produce and equip galleys on a scale that astonished visitors. Trade, war, and state organization fused together in a way few other societies could match. For centuries, Venice dominated major parts of Adriatic and Eastern Mediterranean commerce. It battled rivals like Genoa, negotiated with emperors and sultans, and built a maritime empire stretching across islands, ports, and coastal strongholds. At home, the city turned wealth into spectacle. Palaces lined the Grand Canal, churches glittered with mosaics. Painters, architects, and craftsmen transformed Venice into one of the most visually extraordinary cities on earth. This was not only a center of money and shipping, it was a theater of power. But success brought pressure. Venice had to defend its empire against Ottoman expansion, fend off European rivals, and manage a delicate balance between sea power and mainland interests in northern Italy. Victories could be brilliant, but they were expensive. Defeats could be catastrophic. The Republic was resilient, yet the world around it was changing. Atlantic trade routes began to weaken the old Mediterranean centrality that had favored Venice for so long. And still, Venice endured. That is one of the most impressive things about it. Other powers flared and broke apart, but Venice adapted again and again. Even when its supremacy was challenged, the city remained rich, cultured, and influential. By this stage, Venice was no longer just a successful state, it had become an idea. The serene republic, glittering on the water, disciplined in government, magnificent in appearance, and always balancing beauty with calculation. What happened after Venice's great age is one reason its history remains so compelling. The city did not vanish in a sudden disaster, but its long dominance gradually faded as the balance of power shifted around it. New oceanic routes favored Atlantic powers. The Ottoman Empire contested Venetian influence in the east. European politics became larger, more centralized, and more militarized. Venice remained elegant and important, but it was no longer shaping the wider world as confidently as it once had. Even in decline, though, the city kept its unique identity. It became famous not only for trade and diplomacy, but for ceremony, festivals, printing, music, art, and a refined public image that fascinated outsiders. Venice turned itself into both a functioning state and a legend in its own lifetime. Visitors saw masks, canals, marble palaces, and shimmering reflections, but beneath that beauty lay centuries of disciplined administration and hard political realism. The romance was real, but so was the machinery behind it. The final collapse of the Venetian Republic came not in the medieval world or during its wars with maritime rivals, but in the age of Napoleon. In 1797, after more than 1,000 years of political continuity, the Republic fell. That alone is staggering. Few governments in history lasted so long in recognizable form. Venice, once a power feared and respected across seas, was absorbed into the rearrangements of larger empires. The Republic ended, but the city did not lose its hold on the imagination. That is because Venice raises timeless questions. How can geography shape destiny? How does a vulnerable refuge become a world power? How can beauty coexist with ruthlessness? And how does a state preserve stability for centuries in a world usually defined by upheaval? Venice offers no simple answers, but it shows what can happen when adaptability, trade, and political discipline combine in extraordinary circumstances. It also survives because it is so visual. A city rising from water, a skyline of domes, towers, and campaniles, black gondolas moving through narrow canals, merchant convoys heading east, doges in ceremony, shipwrights laboring in the arsenal, mosaic light in St. Mark's Basilica. These are not just attractive images, they are symbols of a civilization that made itself memorable by design. In the end, the history of Venice matters because it is a story of improbability turned into power. It began as a refuge in a lagoon and became a republic of merchants, sailors, diplomats, and builders who shaped the Mediterranean for centuries. It knew how to negotiate, how to fight, how to display wealth, and how to preserve institutions that outlasted many stronger-looking states. Venice was never merely picturesque. It was strategic, resilient, and fiercely intelligent. And that is why the city still grips audiences now. Venice feels dreamlike, but its history is concrete. Commerce, ambition, danger, engineering, empire, and survival. The water, the stone, and the myths remain, but beneath them is a deeply human story about using weakness as strength and turning an unlikely beginning into one of history's greatest urban achievements.